All right, it's 2 o'clock, but I think we're going to give people another couple of minutes to join. I imagine people start filtering in the next couple of minutes. And we see we've got a call-in user. Maybe this is a good opportunity to check in and see who's calling into the meeting, so we know how to incorporate you in the conversation. Are you able to come off mute?
I think they have to do *6 or *3. I can't remember which one it is.
And if they're driving, disregard this. Just ignore it.
Sure.
Oh, yes, this is Brian Adams that's on audio only. I'm about 10 minutes from the office in between meetings, and as soon as I get in front of my computer, I'll jump back on with the video conference.
Of course. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for letting us know who you are. We were just curious.
Yeah, just me. All right, thanks, you guys. I don't know.
All right, thanks, Brian.
I heard somebody say the *6 to take myself off mute. Is there a code to put myself back on mute?
I think it's the same. Is that right, Josh?
That worked.
Looked like it worked.
I just put Brian back on mute.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for doing that, Josh.
If he's driving, I don't want him pushing too many buttons.
Sure. All right, looks like we've got Brian, we've got Kelly. Maybe we'll give it another minute or two to see if we can get a couple more people to join us. Good afternoon, Kelly. Thanks for joining us. All right, we're 4 minutes past, and it looks like people are starting to filter in. Oh, Kara, I saw that you joined. Good afternoon. And hopefully we'll have more people join along the way, but I don't want to wait too long because we do have a packed agenda and what we want to cover quite a bit. So I imagine we'll have more of our working group members join along the way. So I'll kick us off. So welcome to the fourth meeting of the Low Carbon Fuels Policy Working Group. Thank you for joining, contributing to this process. So my name is Michael Friels. I'm an analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm joined by a team of ODO staff here to support this meeting. So Jessica Rikers will be leading discussion while also watching for raised hands or activity in the chat. Julian Demedio is available to answer questions. Josh Price is available for any technical assistance you may need along the way. If you do run into any technical issues, you can send him a direct message in the chat, or Josh has actually sent you email, so you can respond to that email if you've got questions for him. And we have other Odo staff here to answer questions and support this meeting if something comes up and we need to bring them into it. I'm going to talk through a couple of slides at a time and then pause to see if there are any questions. So I'll try to make some space if you need to jump in, but throw your hand up or throw questions into the chat. That also works just as well. And a friendly reminder, so we are recording this meeting and we record all our public meetings, and they're available on the Oregon Energy Strategy website. And you can certainly go there. If you missed one of our previous meetings, please go back and watch the recording if that's helpful. They're certainly available there, and this recording will be available in a couple of days if you want to refer it to somebody else who might be interested. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the Oregon Department of Energy helps Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. So development of the Oregon Energy Strategy and potential policy actions we'll talk about today are helping us shape an equitable clean energy transition and balance the needs of all communities in Oregon. Let's go to the next slide. So we're using WebEx for this meeting, as you can see. So members of the policy working group are here as panelists. So as panelists, you'll be able you'll have some controls on your screen, and you'll be able to mute or unmute yourself, turn your camera on and off. You can also raise your hand and type in a question in the chat. If you are a member of the public joining as an attendee, you don't have those capabilities. You are kind of in a listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to offer your public comments. We have a public comment portal. We can certainly put a link to that in the chat, and we've also got a link to it later in the presentation that you'll see. I guess you won't see the chat, so I apologize. But we've got a link to that later in the presentation. We would encourage you to contribute your public comments or your ideas or anything you want us to take into account or consider as we're talking about fuel policies. So if we go to the next slide. So this is just kind of a reminder of the different scoping of our policy working groups. So we've got 5 different groups. And of these 5 different groups, there's going to be some conversations also about fuels. And so it's not just limited to our low carbon fuels group that we've got. So we're certainly going to be focused on the best applications of low carbon fuels in buildings, industry, and transportation, and identifying barriers and potential solutions to production and distribution of fuels in Oregon. But it's also important to consider that some of these fuel conversations are happening in these other groups, whether it's transportation electrification, or the buildings group, or the clean electricity generation and transmission. There are a lot of parallel conversations happening at the same time, and those meetings are going on now as well, and they're recorded. And so I would encourage you to look into those if you're kind of curious, what are some of the other conversations or other policy actions that are coming up in those groups. So Jessica is going to talk to us a little bit about the purpose of our working group. So I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And I appreciate all of your time and expertise as we have some of these discussions around low carbon fuels and really the potential for us to get to our greenhouse gas goals in the future within the fuels sectors. I want to just remind everybody that this is really focused today on discussing the considerations around the policy actions that we talked about in the last meeting. And to that end, keep in mind that we really want people to focus on discussing those policy actions. And it's not the best time to bring up barriers. We did that a couple meetings ago. Not the best time to bring up previously discussed policy action items there. It is a good time to identify specific barriers that you see to a policy action and provide us with some ideas on how to address that barrier within the policy action. So just keep that in mind. All of you are very busy people, and we want to be mindful of the time that people are investing in this work group. And then just to remind everybody to think through creatively about what the art of the possible is. I know that that's like one of those really terrible phrases that people use in the business world, but we really are at that stage now where we need to be thinking about how can we achieve these different goals that we have in front of us as a state. And that requires creative thinking. It requires people kind of throwing some ideas out there and let's see if something works or doesn't work for folks. So as I encouraged many of you to do last time, this is our opportunity to be brave, dive into this, and see if we can come up with some helpful information so that Odo, when we're going to draft our draft recommendations for the energy strategy, will have a lot of good information to build off of. So thanks, everybody. I'll pass it back to Michael.
Well, so let me go back here. So we have here our working group roster. So we do have 25 professionals here at Odo, and we're so grateful for all of you attending. If we go to the next slide. And as far as introductions, so I know we've done this previously. It helps to kind of hear who's in the room. So if you'll bear with me, if you could put in the chat your name, affiliation, and maybe share something that you're looking forward to this spring or this May, that would be wonderful. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll just keep moving on, but we'd love to see who's here in the chat along the way. So if we just move into the next slide. All right, so meeting. So obviously this is our fourth meeting of this group. And just to highlight, we've got an additional meeting later this month. There'll be the conclusion, the May 21st meeting, group meeting number 5. That'll be a plenary session where all the members of the policy working groups will come back together to have a conversation and reflect on what's happened, what we've discussed in the policy work groups, and kind of where we're landing as far as policy recommendations. At that time, those will still be draft policy recommendations at that phase, but still, it'll be important to kind of have that conversation, ask questions, and find out what's happening in some of the other groups. I'll talk more at the end of the meeting, but I do want to highlight we do have a deadline on May 9th, so we're going to talk about some policy options now. Some potential policy actions we may incorporate. We'll discuss and we'll debate them a little bit today. But also on the May 9th, if you want to provide public comment all up to that time period, we'll try to incorporate that as best we can and share that on the 21st. So if we go to the next meeting, or next slide, please. So meeting objectives, what we're hoping to focus on today. So we're going to talk about kind of the policy recommendation development process to make sure everybody remembers kind of where we are in the process and what we've got coming up. We're going to talk a little bit about the complementary analysis. Hopefully everyone was able to attend that meeting earlier this month. We'll talk about kind of existing fuel policies. We've got energy innovation here to provide some great insight into kind of the fuel policy landscape, what to think about, as well as some existing fuel policies that exist today in other jurisdictions. And then we'll talk about our policy actions and kind of where we are with our draft policy actions, and we'll debate those a little bit. If we could go to the next slide. And then Jessica, do you want to talk about the group agreements?
I think that I covered this sufficiently in my previous talking points. So I think we can just move on, but just everybody remind yourselves of these.
Great. Could we go to the next slide? So our agenda today, we've got welcome introductions, which we're doing right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of the process ahead, to spend a couple of minutes on that. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the complementary analysis, see if there's anything that came out of that analysis that you want to bring forward and keep in mind when we're looking at policy recommendations. We'll have energy innovation present for a little bit, and then we'll dive into our policy action. Try to make time to have a little bit of break in the middle, because I know a 3-hour meeting is certainly long. So let's go to the next slide, please. The policy recommendation process. So let's kind of talk about the process of how we're going to create our policy recommendations and actions. So if we go to the next slide. So as just a reminder, we started with kind of the energy modeling, giving us some direction. It in itself is not it's not the whole energy strategy. It's just kind of a starting point to get us going. So what we learned from that energy modeling, that we'll need low carbon fuels and we'll need a lot more of them. We're going to need some dispatchable capacity to support the electricity grid. We learned that electrification is really important. We should electrify where we can cost effectively, and then the hard to electrify areas, certainly low carbon fuels are a great candidate for that to meet those application needs. And overall we'll have declining fuel demand over time, and so we need to kind of transition the fuel use we do have from fossil fuels to low carbon fuels, and what we can we'll electrify. Okay, so that gave us some direction on the what. And today we're really focused on the how. What are some policy actions to kind of help that transition? So we go to the next slide. And I guess taking the modeling at face value, we also need to consider the modeling doesn't necessarily incorporate all these other key considerations. And so it touches on them a little bit, but it's important to keep them in mind when we're thinking of policy actions and provide some context. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of provide your lived experience, your professional experience, all these points, and make sure they're incorporated in some of the policy actions we have or we're going to suggest from the policy working group. If you can move to the next slide. Just a reminder of kind of the structure for how we've set up conversations. We are at meeting 4. We're kind of at the end of this process. We went through, used those the modeling findings to kind of set up our conversation. We went over challenges and barriers, did some brainstorming around that, did some brainstorming around some potential strategies to address those barriers. And now we've tried to take that information, have some draft policy actions, and kind of decide and talk through them and decide how we want to move forward with those. So if you could go to the next slide. So how we're going to use these strategies, policy recommendations, actions is kind of interesting, and they'll be kind of directional in the report. And so I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what it's going to look like in the final report. So the strategy will kind of be directional by our policy working group. So as you can see at the bottom, low carbon fuels strategy number 5. That's what we've been focused on. So you can see all the different policy work groups listed as strategy. These are going to be the pathways that at a high level are kind of the categories of how we'll have these conversations and kind of set up these policy recommendations. So if you go to the next slide. So if you see the strategies at this top level, below the strategies, for each strategy, there'll be some policy recommendations that are, again, kind of high level statements, kind of a summary of what's coming ahead. So these conceptually will kind of lead people to say generally, directionally what we want to do, but the policy actions will say specifically what we recommend needs to be accomplished. So if we go to the next slide. So policy recommendations for the low carbon fuels group. I believe this is the first time you're seeing them. The first one is promote development of low carbon fuel resources to increase their overall supply, affordability, and availability all Oregon communities. And the second one, reduce demand for fossil fuel resources and ease the transition burden to low carbon fuels and hard to electrify applications in transportation, industry, and electricity generation while retaining resilience and safety. And the third, protect existing critical Oregon businesses and energy consumers while overall fuel demand declines and transitions to low carbon fuels and hard to electrify applications. So those are the guiding statements, and under each of those points, we'll have some recommended policy actions. So if we go to the next slide. So kind of summary of what we've just showed. So a strategy of high level direction will be low carbon fuels. And then we'll have each of these 3 recommendations under that strategy. And then we're trying to select some actionable recommendations that will be the policy actions under each of those recommendations. So I will pause to kind of see if we have any questions or anybody just raise their hand, because I want you to have a good idea of what this is going to look like in the final report.
I thought I heard a hand go up, but I'm not seeing one. So.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
I see it. It's in our attendees. So Mike, this meeting is focused around having participants who are members of the working group provide information, and so you can send a message directly to Stacy in your chat, and she should be able to provide you with any information you might need. But the discussion is really meant to be around for the working group members. So. Also, I will add, we have another, oh, we lost that call-in user. Okay, never mind. I thought we had a new call-in user, but in addition to you, Brian, but I see you've moved over and you're now in virtual real life. So, oh, there is that call-in user. I missed them. There's a person on the phone, and we just want to see if you could identify yourself so that we know who it is and we can make sure you get a chance to participate if you're a member of the working group. It's *6 to come off mute if you're able to do that.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
This is Devin McReal with Cascade Natural Gas. I'm going through an airport. I'm going to get on my computer soon, but just wanted to make sure I could call in.
God, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
You bet.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, and if you do have any feedback on these recommendations on the language, you can certainly send that through public comment following the meeting. But I think we'll move forward. So Jessica, can you take us through the complementary analysis?
Yes, I can. Apologize. I'm managing about 4 screens right now, which is not my strong suit. So, all right. So next we're going to discuss, as Michael pointed out, the complementary analysis. Next slide. So on April 16th, Odo held a public information session where our consultants provided results on the air quality and the energy wallet analyses. They also shared insights on what to expect from the forthcoming jobs analysis. I hope you are all able to join or listen in to the recording later on. In the interest of time, we're not going to walk through those analyses, but we do want to hear, did those results spark any new thinking on barriers or policy gaps you'd like to share? And I'll just note that some of the key findings that were reflected in that meeting are all 5 sample households saved money with vehicle electrification. All 5 sample households saved energy from electrification of home heating, but not all sample households saved money from heat pump installation, absent policy support. So where there were policy supports in place, that was different. Multiple factors impact how great the savings could be from electrification of home heating and transportation. Energy prices, cost, and access to technology based on household income, technological development, production, and supply chain challenges. All of these things had an effect on the savings that home would have accrued, or the sample homes would have accrued. Policies are important to enable access to cost savings. For example, education, incentive programs, infrastructure development, and access to usable technology, workforce development, all of these things help enable some of the cost savings that could be brought into a household. And upfront costs must be addressed. This is to ensure equal access to the savings from electrification. And we've heard from a lot of stakeholders that this needs to be intentional, explicit policies that ensure environmental justice and equitable solutions to make that happen. So any questions or comments from your takeaways from the complementary analysis? Great. And I see, and before I hand it back to Michael, I see that there is another call-in user. This one's a 503-467 number. And again, if you could identify yourself so that if you're a member of the group, we know who you are and we can help make sure that you get a chance to participate in the conversation. To come off mute, you would want to hit *6. They may be driving or in transit. So I think with that, I don't see any things in the chat about the complementary analysis, so I will hand it back to you, Michael.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Can we go to the next slide? So early in the process, in our first meeting, we received feedback from this group that it would be helpful to understand kind of fuel policies in other states or jurisdictions. So we did a search for technical assistance around fuel policies, and Energy Innovation volunteered to provide us with some insight into what we may want to consider in developing fuel policy, as well as some examples. And so our presenter today is Dan Esposito. Dan is the Fuels and Chemicals Policy Program Lead at Energy Innovation, a nonpartisan energy and climate policy research firm. So his work supports the production, transport, and storage, strategic use of clean hydrogen, carbon capture, bioresources, and other derivative products. Dan brings a decade of experience across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including energy market analytics, consulting, state utility, consumer advocacy, and federal decarbonization strategy. We're really appreciative that Dan is here to chat with us for a little bit and present on some of his research and findings. So let's stop sharing our screen, and Dan, if you want to jump up and share your screen.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for that introduction, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Dan.
Let me just make sure I get this set up.
Yeah.
Okay, everything look good from your perspective?
Yep, looks good. We can see your screen.
Great. Well, thank you, and to everyone here. It's a privilege to be here to talk with you all about low carbon fuels policy design. So as Michael said, I'm Dan Esposito. I lead our fuels and chemicals policy work at Energy Innovation, nonpartisan energy and climate policy research firm. We work with legislators and states at the federal level and internationally on smart climate policy design. We have 6 different programs within our team. As you can see here, electricity, electrification, industry, transportation, fuels and chemicals, of course, is my focus, but just to point attention to as well, we have an energy policy modeling team, which has an open source tool online that's free, publicly accessible, where you can kind of toggle different energy policies and see the impact on emissions and various economic and public health indicators. So we lead with that kind of modeling work, and then our other 5 programs work on more specific policy design questions. Just a little bit more about my background. Though I lead our fuels and chemicals policy program, most of the work the past few years has frankly been on hydrogen. So I just want to, I believe these slides will be available for everybody after this call, and these are all hyperlinked, but we have a lot of publicly available hydrogen resources. We don't have as much published on the biofuel side or carbon capture side. And to the degree that questions come up, I might have a lot more to say about the hydrogen side, but we spent quite a bit of time in advance of this call trying to do a landscape analysis of the state policies and policies in other countries focused across the domain of low carbon fuels more generally. And I worked with other colleagues within our organization and other nonprofits and research firms as well to kind of bring things up to speed. But I do want a quick disclaimer. This was, we did our best, but we had a relatively short time frame. It's a very busy time, as I'm sure it is for everybody. So I just want to express this is non-exhaustive. And we don't necessarily consider things in this deck to be recommendations unless we explicitly say so. But we wanted to kind of just, again, provide a landscape analysis of what other states and jurisdictions are doing in this space. So I have a pretty robust slide deck here. As far as the agenda goes, I am hoping to spend a little bit of time on just some guiding principles for smart low carbon fuels policy design up front. And then I have a lot of slides on the various examples that my team and I found as part of this process. And I'm going to skip through some of them, but really I would love to get a sense of this group of how we should spend, frankly, the majority of this time. If there's certain areas that you want to dig in on at a deeper level, or if we want to have a broader discussion, all of that is fine. But I don't expect to get in depth into every single policy that we had identified without that request, just so I'm not talking at you for 45 minutes. So I want to start with just a refresher. When I got looped into this process with the Odo team, at this point, the Evolved Energy Research modeling results had come out, and so I familiarized myself with them. I should say I'm based out of Colorado. I work across a variety of states, but I'm not intimately familiar with the policy landscape of Oregon specifically. So it's really helpful to go through this modeling. And there's a few things that kind of jumped out at me in terms of looking at the policy recommendations. One from this graphic is that ground vehicles are overwhelmingly electrified. A couple more was that the gas distribution volumes for buildings fall substantially and don't appear to rely on hydrogen. And then by contrast, industry uses a wide range of low carbon fuel options. And then lastly, as far as the electric sector goes, there's not a high volume of low carbon fuels, but they are of course critically important to keeping the grid reliable 24/7. And so the research correct questions seem more about timing and capacity rather than needing a huge volume per se. So, with any modeling, what the model says doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen or even necessarily the best path moving forward. I believe Michael mentions earlier that there's a wide range of things that don't get incorporated into models, but I wanted to start from this place of these results and kind of forming the recommendations. So from kind of talking with other experts and pulling some things together at a high level, we learned that it's pretty easy to design low carbon fuels policies that have little to even harmful climate impacts, and they can be difficult to unwind because you end up with strong political inertia and infrastructure lock-in for systems that might not be beneficial long term. And it's tough because it sometimes doesn't set jurisdictions up for long-term success that matches the kinds of outcomes that we're seeing in the economic modeling from an organization like Evolved Energy Research. And so what we're trying to focus on here and supporting these deep decarbonization goals for 2050 is policy frameworks that develop the needed low carbon fuels and low carbon fuel using infrastructure and technologies in the near term, but look long term as to how the system needs to develop over the coming decades. So, in the grand scheme of climate policy, as I think you've identified with having these other strategies and working groups, low carbon fuels take a backseat to efficiency and clean electrification. But of course, they're critical for that last section of emissions. And as far as our review of policies goes, it's kind of a red flag if a policy promotes low carbon fuels over efficiency or electrification in those areas where electrification would be more cost effective, again, according to the kind of models that we're seeing and the even real world evidence that's playing out today. On that note, we didn't find a ton of shining examples to follow, in part because this is such a new space and a lot of these technologies are new, and so everybody's kind of getting started. The landscape review that I'll go over later has a mix of policies that are in place, but also just research from other institutions that are trying to answer these really thorny problems of how we build out the infrastructure we need. So this kind of led us to some guiding principles. We want policy that supports truly clean and sustainable low carbon fuel production. So we want sustainable biofeedstocks. This is more of like the waste categories: forest residues, municipal wastes, agricultural waste, with conservative carbon intensity assumptions that look more carefully at the real world impacts these feedstocks are having, and trying to make sure that the incentive structures don't motivate the generation of extra waste or the mismanagement of waste. We kept seeing calls for capping or phasing out support for first generation biofeedstocks that looked more favorable 20 years ago, but have not had evidence showing that they've reduced emissions over that time period. And then on the hydrogen front, looking to prioritize hydrogen production that's truly clean and sets those systems up for success. And then the other side of the coin is making sure that we're supporting low carbon fuel uptake in those applications that really need it, and making sure that they're not crowding out electrification with very high subsidies, where electrification is a longer term, cheaper solution. So we found that bioresources, we should be trying to funnel them into materials, which we're already doing today, things like wood furniture, chemicals, including plastics and aviation fuel. Hydrogen similarly should be directed more to its feedstock applications like refining, chemicals, steel, and then aviation and marine shipping fuels. And then it's not to say that these are the only categories. There's other niche applications, but based on some of the evidence I'm going to go through quickly here, there's just not enough high quality resources to go around and serve everything. So we really need to make sure that they get used where we don't have any other solution. It's the main value that these resources are providing and why I'm personally very passionate about them. So I'm not going to go through in great detail these next few slides here on the evidence, but I just wanted to kind of point to, for example, an analysis from the Energy Transitions Commission, which is a collection of C-suite leaders of major, even oil and gas companies, banks, utilities, airports, power developers, etc. Where they landed on their biomass analysis was basically we should be sourcing our biomass from things like, again, agricultural wastes, municipal wastes, forestry residue. And when you total up these sources, you only end up with, I'm not even going to get into the units, but a relatively small supply relative to some other big claims that are being made about the supply of sustainable biofeedstocks. And on the use side, if you take that supply that they say we can create globally by 2050, once you apply them to those highest value uses that don't really have other good options, so materials, feedstocks, and aviation, there's not really any left to go around. And this is, again, at a global scale, so it'll involve trade among other jurisdictions, but that's where we're that's the evidence that we're seeing on the bio side. And then similarly on the hydrogen side, when you're talking hydrogen production, a lot going on in this graphic, but at a high level glance, the blue bars are the emissions you would reduce from using hydrogen in these various end use sectors. And this turquoise line over here is the emissions you would produce by using electrolysis, unless you're very careful about where that electricity comes from. So there's this assumption that kind of in the near term, any hydrogen is good hydrogen, and we really need to be careful about how these systems develop to not make emissions worse. And then likewise, we did a very extensive analysis, I think something like 400 sources pulled together over a period of years, and found that there's these excellent and good categories where hydrogen is really needed and would be competitive with other decarbonization technologies. And then, even in heavy duty vehicles and much of the industrial process heat sector, there's other options that are found to be more cost effective. And the big reason this is so important is because if you tally up all those hydrogen end uses versus what the Department of Energy thinks we might be able to produce by 2050 if everything goes right, we don't even have half as much hydrogen as we would need to use in the excellent and good categories. So we're going to need bioresources as well, and collectively between bioresources and hydrogen, we can do the job, but kind of just barely. So again, all this coming back to we need clean resources and we need to make sure they're going to the places that really need to use them. I'm going to skip some of this and just say, of the policies that are out there that we reviewed, this slide is for hydrogen, but it kind of applies to bio resources as well. They end up falling in camps similar to this in terms of using hydrogen or low carbon fuels generally. You can work with things like advanced market commitments where you have governments or private collectives come together to promise the purchase of certain amounts of, you just say clean products, it doesn't even need to be hydrogen per se. Contracts for differences, reverse auctions, subsidies for the equipment or for low carbon fuel using equipment on a use basis. And then of course, R&D, which is typically more at the federal level, and performance standards, which while they do a great job of ensuring you end up reaching your policy goals, you have a little bit less cost control with performance standards unless you implement some of these other incentives and subsidies in the near term. Let's skip this. And again, happy to revisit anything on the principal side, but I realize I'm already going a little bit longer than I wanted to. So as far as example policies, there's no perfect categorization here, but we tried to arrive at some sort of structure in terms of how we're thinking about these questions. And so we wound up with 4 camps here. Targeted low carbon fuels development and use, making sure we have dispatchable capacity for the electric sector, coordinating electrification and low carbon fuels, and finally decreasing fuel demand, but pivoting business models so that these companies have a real role to play in a clean economy. So I'm just gonna hit on a few of these. It's hard to talk about low carbon fuels without looking at clean fuel standards. I know Oregon has a clean fuel standard. I'm not entirely familiar with all the ins and outs, but everybody I've talked to around California's LCFS sees a few issues with how they're designed today. They tend to favor biofuels over electrification. And again, we're talking ground vehicles here. So if we're seeing in the modeling that ground vehicles are almost entirely electrified, it should raise some flags that most of the money from these programs has been going to biofuels for use in vehicles. We've seen that these policies haven't really done a great job necessarily of reducing emissions, even though they are diversifying our fuel supply, which has other benefits. But there's concerns around land use change, crediting biofuels that would have been produced even without this policy. Sometimes there's negative or deeply negative carbon intensity scores that researchers don't find to be justified. And there's a lot of kind of accounting challenges with ensuring the sustainability of your supply. Like if you're using waste oils from across the world, it turns out to be quite difficult to know that they're actually waste and not virgin oils from, they're chemically identical, having virgin oils and waste oils. And so you need to be really sure that what you're getting is what you're asking for. And then there's concerns about raising retail prices for consumers and businesses as well. But it is the tool that we have in a lot of states, and I'm not trying to say it's all been bad, but from, again, talking to some other experts, what I have found to be helpful would be kind of capping some of these first generation biofuel credits in favor of trying to get more of the advanced or second generation fuels like the cellulosic biomass and the waste biomass. Updating carbon intensity scores. Again, we can dig into any of this as well. And then trying to find ways to, increase more funding for the electric vehicle infrastructure. And then at the same time, making adjustments that help direct these gradually changing new biofuel sources to those sectors that need it long term. It's very difficult to work in aviation and marine shipping in general, especially aviation, because the Federal Aviation Administration has final say over regulations. But it seems like there's some tweaks to these policies that can help aviation or aircraft and marine shipping fuels get credit for under this program, and that can be an avenue of introducing some of these low carbon fuels. There's a range of policy programs throughout the world that are focused on industrial fuel switching. This table has what we consider to be priority policies, things like standards that limit greenhouse gas emissions from industrial processes. The big thing with industrial fuel switching is really the difference between the cost that industries are getting for paying for fossil fuels today and the cost that they would be paying for either low carbon fuels or electricity. So policies that reduce the cost of clean electricity both help direct electrification as well as e-fuels, things, coming from electrolytic hydrogen, for example. And then production tax credits and subsidies for cleanly manufactured products. So these help narrow that price gap over time, but there's some other policies that are maybe honestly more helpful in the nearer term, but often extra challenging at the state level where there might not be a huge state budget for things like research and development grants and major pilot projects without some sort of cost sharing with the federal government. So there's a wide range of options available, and we tried to link to those that we could find across this space, but at the same time, it would be difficult, I imagine, for Oregon to have the same kind of program as some of these US federal government funding initiatives and what you might see at the national level. There wasn't quite as much as at the state level that's in place today from what we can find. Skipping over aviation marine shipping for the moment. On the electricity front, so an eventual clean electricity system in Oregon is likely going to rely on a lot of wind, solar, and hydropower. And so you need particularly flexibility at the seasonal and even multi-annual time frame to account for changes in hydropower. And so really the three classes of options here are dispatchable resources, and there's some efforts out of New York in particular on requests for information and requests for proposals and procurement targets for different technology options here. We saw that Oregon has a great geology for enhanced geothermal systems, which is a relatively new technology, but is finding a lot of success and might have more support under the current federal administration as well. So there might be some good options on that front. Proactive transmission development would be really helpful to the degree that these new dispatchable resources are far from the load centers that'll be consuming most of the electricity. And Texas is a great example of what has found success in the past. There's also opportunities for reconductoring existing transmission lines. And then flexible demand is a really important one for bringing users on who can adjust their consumption with variable outputs and wind and solar generation. So there's some examples of electricity tariff design in Texas. There's companies who've gone out and put out requests for proposals for flexible demands to co-locate with their wind resources, for example. And we've done a lot of work on the concept of energy parks where you're encouraging large new generators to come online in parallel with flexible consumers like electrolyzers and thermal batteries for providing industrial heats and things of that nature. So we provided some resources there. We looked into this question of market design and regulatory frameworks for very low capacity factor power plants. And this is more at the theoretical level. So we included, I'm happy, again, any of this happy to talk more about, but there's not a lot of action that's been taken even at the national level throughout the world on this yet. It's mostly in the theoretical phase. In this third section of kind of coordinating electrification with low carbon fuel demands, a lot of this is just kind of resources, but there's one policy I wanted to highlight: Colorado's greenhouse gas emissions and energy management for manufacturing rulings, or the GEM 1 and 2 rulings. Colorado did an analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions from the top emitting industrial facilities and put together a framework where they're now saying, okay, of this group of facilities, you each get assigned your emissions share, and collectively you need to meet this emissions reduction target by 2030. And so you have your own tailored commitments, but you can also trade amongst yourselves who's doing what. And I believe the rulings require actions to happen at these facilities. So they're actually decarbonizing where the emissions are happening instead of pushing them to other sectors or looking for offsets. But there's some provisions that allow you to move off-site if you're one of those industries that just doesn't have a good option at the moment. So it's very tailored. It seems like to me a good solution for small to medium-sized states where it might be easier to kind of locate and identify and rank the top emitters and work with them on custom solution sets over this, long but predictable time frame. There's also more comprehensive policies, like in Massachusetts, there's a whole clean energy and climate plan that has a bunch of programs. Most of these are not focused on electrification, but it does have a commercial industrial program in both efficiency and electrification, one of which is achieving the electrification of 52% of final energy and industry. So there's a package of policies that might be relevant and worth looking into. Lots more examples of funding and grant programs, building material tax exemptions, Buy Clean, and green public procurement programs. We found a database on policies driving agricultural electrification, so I won't go into this at the moment, but there's a big database of all these different utility and rural co-op programs, as well as a few guides that we found on policy design for agricultural electrification. So these are more reports than specific policies, although some of them have case studies that might be relevant. And the last piece on this section is coordinated electric and gas utility planning. So this can happen both at the supply side of making sure you have enough electricity and gas and you're planning that in parallel, but also on the distribution system side, how do you make sure that electric and gas utilities are co-optimizing the transmission and distribution build-outs of wires and pipelines? So we flagged this analysis from Regulatory Assistance Project and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab as being a great recent resource that's looking at this. But admittedly, it is a challenge because they only found, for the most part, it's dual fuel utilities where these kinds of actions are taking place today. And as far as I can tell, Massachusetts might be the only one where it's not necessarily dual fuel utilities that are having to consider this integrated planning. So this is a relatively newer space, but one that also has a lot of co-benefits beyond decarbonization, as it's just helpful to have these planning horizons evolve together to make sure that we don't have, I don't want to say redundant infrastructure because that can be good, but we want to co-optimize it to the degree possible. And then very close to the end here, on the gas transition, we found quite a range of policies that aim to limit the expansion of the existing natural gas distribution system. Not to halt it by any means, but if, again, the analysis is telling us that we're going to have far lower gas volumes delivered to buildings, then we probably don't want the same size infrastructure being socialized across that much smaller class. And so it looks like Oregon already has policies to eliminate subsidies for natural gas line extensions and new gas hookups. Colorado, for example, has a clean heat standard that requires gas utilities to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions intensity of their fuels over time. And decisions from last summer and this February for Xcel and Black Hills basically ended up with a near-term focusing on electrification and efficiency, which again, they don't have 100% greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, so maybe RNG and hydrogen will pop up down the road, but at least at the moment, the first steps have been focused on those actions. We saw similar results with a kind of proactive decision by the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, which at least for now rejected RNG and hydrogen in favor of electrification and efficiency. And then we see this in building performance standards and energy codes, with an example of codes for New York City's new large commercial buildings. And then there's an example in California of looking at pilot projects to identify and start transitioning entire neighborhoods off of gas to kind of cap certain pipeline infrastructure where it's no longer going to be needed. And this is based on cost analyses that showed that instead of going in and repairing and replacing new pipelines that are due for replacement or repair, it would actually be cheaper to fully electrify those neighborhoods and bypass those infrastructure costs. And then there's pivoting business models. The two I really want to highlight are thermal energy networks, basically a concept for moving heat and concert with the ground, rather than moving a gaseous fuel. And so Eversource in Massachusetts has a pilot project where they're testing this in a town in Massachusetts right now. And then there's other kind of provisions in these various states that are enabling these kind of pilot projects and studies. And then again, Oregon looks like a great spot for enhanced geothermal. This could be for providing electricity or even just heat for industrial processes. Colorado has a few grant programs and tax credits. That is all I could really find on this right now, but it is geothermal's been around a long time, but enhanced geothermal is quite new. So it doesn't shock me that we haven't seen more on this. And then lastly here, as I'm sure you all know, there's a lot of work to do on electrification of these various sectors, plus cleaning the grid. So really, my takeaway from this landscape analysis was we want to look for ways to change the types of biomass being procured and try to start moving it out of, fuels for vehicles and toward aviation industry and marine shipping, where we're really going to need it, starting to lay the groundwork for that. There's a lot of room for just R&D and early procurement and things like dispatchable electricity capacity and thermal energy networks. And then we're going to look toward those long-term infrastructure needs. So where can we avoid potentially stranded costs in, for example, our pipeline systems, and co-optimize that with electrification. Well, I don't think I have this on the slide, but while making sure that we have whatever pipelines we do need to move things like hydrogen for industry or power generators or collection networks for some of the waste biomass resources. So I apologize. I went a little bit over the time I wanted to, but I think we still have maybe 10 to 15 minutes, Michael, for questions, and I'm happy to just have that general discussion or go back to any of the slides that I shared. But yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment.
Yeah, that'd be great, Dan. So I know some stuff came up in the chat, but does anybody want to raise their hand or have a question directly for Dan or have any questions about some of the policies that came up? Yeah, and I guess I'll just add while people are thinking about any questions they want to add, that this is kind of informational, provide some additional kind of policy information and consider as we're thinking about Oregon policy. So this isn't necessarily advocating one policy action or another. So it's just trying to give us a sense of some conversations they're having in other areas or other things to keep in mind.
Michael, this is Jessica. Rebecca has her hand raised, and then Corey after her. Corey Ann.
Yeah, Rebecca, do you want to start us off?
Hi, yes, thank you, Michael. Rebecca Smith, we're representing the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. Apologies, first off, my internet has been going in and out, but Xfinity assures me they're on the case. So I may have missed some context here, but I was hoping that you might be able to just reiterate, Dan, your I guess why you're not as big of a fan for hydrogen for medium and heavy duty on-road end uses, And is that just because in the near term, the very low supply of renewable and or very low CI hydrogen, or is it wanting to electrify those or to use other biofuels? I apologize.
Oh, no, it's no problem at all. Yeah, so it's a short combination of things. One is more of some of the technology assessments we've done, including the modeling that Evolved Energy Research did for Oregon, tends to point toward electrification being the dominant strategy, not necessarily that hydrogen has no role, but sometimes the conversation tends to suggest that hydrogen is the one answer for heavy duty vehicles. And so we want to kind of make sure that we're careful about what types of investments we're making in that space. But the other, and honestly more important to me, is looking at the potential production of hydrogen by, say, 2050, relative to where we really need to use it. Some of the work that we've done has basically found that if we have a large supply of hydrogen in even medium and heavy duty vehicles, then we're unlikely to have the supply that we need for things like steel and chemicals and aviation and marine shipping fuels and ammonia. So
it's really that merit order of deployment.
Yeah. So, and there's a whole transition. We're not going to immediately start using hydrogen for chemicals production, for example, except for where we already do in ammonia and methanol. So there's a glide path, but we just want to make sure that over the long term, we're keeping our eyes on those end uses that really need this hydrogen to decarbonize.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Corianne, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, good afternoon. So, hey, I'm going to pick up on the comment in the chat from John Plaza. I mean, with respect to the comments about the low carbon fuel standards comments, I mean, I have the exact opposite view of what you presented in that slides. For the state of Oregon and for the state of California, it's got to be the most successful GHG reductions policies that have been implemented in the past decade. And I do think that even looking forward to, widespread electrification going out to 2050, I still think that there is a very important role to play for those sectors that are hard to electrify. So, and I think that there are ways to continue to lean into that policy as a tool to do that. And I would also recognize that Oregon is not in the same place as California is as far as decarbonizing. And I think that there's just a longer, runway where the policy can still be super helpful for the state. The talking points that you had largely are I'm just gonna say it, right? It's very biased to one perspective of an LCFS policy. And I think the companies that actually actively participate in those markets bring a lot to the table as far as liquid fuels, renewable hydrogen. I mean, all of the other fuels other than electricity, in addition to electricity. And so I would definitely recommend that you keep looking at ways to use low carbon fuel standards as one of the tools in the portfolios moving forward.
Appreciate
the
comment.
Yeah, you, Corianne. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was just going to say I appreciate the perspective and the feedback here, and yeah, this is a very complex topic and a lot going into these policies, and we take an admittedly narrow view of just what the climate research is telling us. Trying to talk to the various experts out there on that narrow front, but there's so much that goes into it, and so yeah, I appreciate all the thoughts you shared, Corianne.
Yeah, thanks, Corianne. Kelly, did you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much. I guess my video is not coming in. Sorry about that. Kelly Hale with the Eugene Water and Electric Board. I'm just curious about the low carbon fuel standard comments that you had as well. And I would love to learn more about what you were talking about of moving into the second generation biofuels. We are a big biofuel purchaser, have a contract that enables biofuel purchasing from a lot of public entities in our part of the state. And wondering if you're seeing that those programs, low carbon fuel standards, or in Oregon, the clean fuels low carbon fuel standard, do they, I mean, it seemed like the intent of it was to prioritize fuels that had lower and lower carbon intensity. Are you not seeing that that's working as intended? And where is the disconnect there that you're seeing so that that is not prioritizing that intended outcome?
Yeah, it's a great question. From the conversations I've had, it has more to do with like it's a challenge that extends beyond Oregon in terms of how carbon intensity calculations are being made. There's a lot of momentum behind the GREET model at the Department of Energy and how things have come together over a period of 20 plus years. I'm not here to say I have all the answers or know, exactly where to go from here, but in particular, looking at the research from the Energy Transitions Commission, and trying to dig through, it's a really big report. The main takeaway I got from that is that you want to be prioritizing biomass that's is not having other land use impacts. So for example, the federal renewable fuel standard that's led to all the ethanol blending in gasoline has been shown to have basically no climate impact over 20 years, and now it uses 40% of our corn crop. And is a huge budgetary item that we can't really do anything about. And that kind of land use change, if you just converted I'm not suggesting we do this, but if you just converted all that corn to the natural environment, you would have a much bigger impact on emissions than even if you're going back to the just standard fossil gasoline. Whereas if you're using agricultural residues and waste products and dead trees from, I think it's like the beetles in Colorado, or wildfire mitigation, pulling out forest residues in that manner, that does have a good, more robust climate impact. But all of this accounting is so complex that I don't think I have a clear enough answer as to how the Oregon CFS has succeeded or not in this domain. Just trying to kind of pull these evidentiary pieces together as guideposts for how to think about these policies and how they're set up moving forward.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Sorry if that wasn't totally clear answer to your question.
So thanks, Dan. Michael, I wanted to share a point that John made in the chat, which I think Corey was alluding to when she was speaking, but he kind of asked this question: how does the demand of electricity from the AI, artificial intelligence sector factor into the analysis for green hydrogen? It seems that power prices are moving out of the range of being viable for use as an energy source for hydrogen. And he flags an IEA report here that kind of backs some of that up. So any thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, just to make sure I understand, the idea is power prices are increasing from load growth, and that might make electrolysis less viable, at least in the near term. Is that right?
John, if you want to come off mute and confirm, if you're able. Actually, I'm not even seeing John anymore.
Oh, okay.
He might have gotten dropped accidentally. Maybe he should call Xfinity as well. Let's assume that was the question, then. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and to the degree that electricity gets more expensive from load growth, it's going to cause a lot of problems downwind of hydrogen production as well. Hydrogen production is kind of one of those things that we really need to do long term, but kind of the main way at least on the electrolytic side, is to get electricity prices down or find those kinds of business models that allow electrolyzers to capture excess renewable energy when we have too much wind and solar and shut down in other periods, something that doesn't make a lot of economic sense today because electrolyzers are very expensive, but will make sense as those capital costs come down and as our grid cleans up. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty with hydrogen right now with federal policy kind of up in the air. I think the near-term challenges are pretty steep, but we still need to kind of find ways to make sure that over the long term, we're enabling that infrastructure to get built out and finding ways to bring those costs down.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. I see that Kara has her hand up, so I wanted to pass it to her. And then I saw Brittany's hand just went up, so we'll go to Brittany after Kara.
Thanks so much, Dan. What an amazing amount of material you covered in a relatively short period of time. I especially appreciated the focus at the end on electrification and gas transition and some of the important movement we're going to have to make on how to plan the energy system writ large and how the two can help and potentially hinder if we don't get to some good answers. I wonder if, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the fact that our gas utilities are long-term business entities in this state, that they're well perceived by customers, that their employees are happy, they're like solid businesses, other than they're selling a fuel that can no longer be used. Have you seen, I'm tracking just a little bit of sort of business model transition where we can help our gas utilities have a solid business moving forward, and frankly, help our electric utilities with the enormous job that's on their, on their task list, one that may not be possible without help. Have you seen any resources sort of exploring different business models for gas utilities that are single, right, as opposed to dual fuel? It makes it a lot harder.
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and it's always tough thinking through this problem too, because especially from a climate standpoint, you could be a little bit too flippant about the gas utility need to transition because they've continue to do so much good to keep our homes warm and then supply gas to all the other uses as well. So narrowly, one example we've seen is this idea of thermal energy networks where you're still using pipes to move heat. I think there's a lot of potential there, but of course the challenge is what you're talking about, like replacing one pipeline system with another, and the coordination and the transition challenge is really tricky. So right now we're just seeing pilots at the neighborhood level and kind of seeing where things go from there. So I don't know to what degree that can scale, but it's really interesting to me because the main way gas utilities make money is off of pipeline infrastructure, and so you're still managing a pipeline in that sense. The other things I'm seeing here, just from not so much a business model framework yet, but from this evolved energy research analysis, we're seeing we still need a lot of gas plants, or that's the technology it's choosing, let's say, that don't run very often, but when they do run, it's to keep the lights on in those critical periods. And so there's things like that. There's some critical users that still need a molecule delivered to them, particularly in industry. And so it's tough to say ultimately how much pipeline infrastructure that requires, but it does seem like that's a problem that needs to be solved, that we need really smart people behind that know how to manage and build and safely operate pipelines. So I think ultimately it's going to be a smaller total profile or network, but there's still a big role for that kind of delivery infrastructure. It's just a different need and moving a different set of molecules. I'm sorry, you asked about whether there's any frameworks. Not that I've seen yet. It's mostly things like these kind of coordinated planning documents that I have on this slide, and then a lot of first steps over the next 5 to 10 years. Things like that are on this slide that are saying, let's stop expanding as quickly as we have been historically, and see where we can kind of stop networks that we can easily phase out while we continue to think about this challenge of what a bigger transition looks like.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. Thanks for the question, Kara. Really appreciate that. We are starting to bump up against time, and we do want to get moving forward. We have one more question. And before I hand it off to Brittany, just want to thank Dan for the hard work. This is a lot of information to bring to this group, and appreciate everything that you did to provide us with even more information and context for us to think about as we're moving into the last few weeks of providing input around policy action. So thank you. Brittany, why don't you come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, it's just it's not really a question. I just wanted to clarify one thing. So on the energy crops versus using like waste biomass. So how the federal RFS program is set up, you can't generate a D3 RIN, which are the higher value RINs from an energy crop. So the projects that we see are mostly not energy crops, they're from like waste biomass. And then also us at Northwest Natural, we're investing in RNG, and we're as well investing in only waste biomass. We're not investing in energy crops. So I just wanted to put out there that the type of projects we're looking at, we're not growing a bunch of corn to make biomass. These are definitely from like landfills that are emitting methane that we're collecting, or like wastewater treatment plants. So I just wanted to give that one clarification on how the RINs work. You get more higher value for the waste versus the energy crop.
Thank you, Brittany, and I'm sorry if with you and anybody else on here, my background on Oregon-specific actions and policies is not quite as strong, so I apologize if I implied any actions, by any individuals on the call. But thanks for that clarification. That's helpful.
Yeah, no worries.
And thank you all for having me. I'm sure this resource will be sent around, but I'm always available if people have other questions. If there's any way I can help out with the challenge but exciting opportunity that you all have, please let me know. We're always happy to help. But again, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Yeah, Dan, we'll share the slides out with the group and post them on our website as well, with the meeting recording, everything like that. So people have access to them. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so we're close enough to the halfway point that I'd love to take a quick break. So if we could take a break until 3:25. So it looks like we got about 7 minutes. People need a bio break or grab a drink of water or whatever they need. So we'll just come right back at 3:25 and move forward. All right. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, Josh, can you advance the slide for me? Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about potential policy actions and go through that process. You go to the next slide. So I have a few slides for you to kind of remind you some level setting on kind of the policy development process again. So one thing to keep in mind is that our focus is on state level policies within energy strategy. The energy strategy itself will have these recommendations for the Oregon State Legislature and the governor's office, and we are just focused on the state level policies that are most relevant to our discussion around kind of fuels, and we want to make sure we're providing an important context. We're thinking of kind of like policy gaps or what the state of Oregon can do to advance decarbonization within fuels. And again, maybe some of the policy we come up will impact some of these other policy areas, but we are focused on what the state of Oregon can do. All right, so if you can move to the next slide. Another thing to consider is kind of the timeline we've got where we're at and what we've got ahead of us. So the timing of this kind of matters for implementation. So the energy strategy is due November 2025, and our focus is on near term, but not necessarily right now. So any policy recommendations we have or we put within the energy strategy itself isn't legislative policy. It's just going to be some recommendations. So likely, even if legislature, the governor's office sees those recommendations and wants to think that they could be potential policy, most likely it wouldn't be aimed at or it wouldn't actually come about until legislative session in 2027. So we need to kind of consider what's in place now, what's happening in the existing legislative session that we're going through right now, and what is underway or what may change the policy landscape between now and 2027 or 2028. So we don't want to duplicate what's already happening or what could happen in the near term. So it's important to keep that in mind. All right, so now we're going to kind of walk through how we're going to take group input in kind of this process when we're looking at draft policy actions. Jessica, can you take us through this process?
If I can figure out how to get myself off mute, absolutely take us through this process. So, all right. So, for this process right now, I'm going to sort of guide us through the list of potential policy actions that Michael was referring to. I'm sorry, I cannot put my talking points on the screen in front of me, which is causing me a problem. There we go. I fixed it. Technology at work. So these were created based on the policy barriers and the potential strategies that came out of this group over the last 2 meetings prior to this, as well as some things that came out of other policy working groups and our discussions with our peer agencies at the state and the advisory group that provides input during this work, as well as public comments in general. So the idea is these are draft ideas and we're going to use them to guide our conversation. But for the first phase, we just want to share these with you so that if you have any clarifying questions about what the meaning behind what is actually written for the policy action, so that we can provide some clarity on that, that would help then facilitate discussions to come later. That's what we're really looking for. So we have about 90 minutes for discussion, and we may not get through everything today, but I really want to point out, and I'm sure that one of my team can throw into the chat the link to our comment portal for the energy strategy. We're not going to be able to get to everything. You're not going to be able to say everything you want to say, and we really want you to participate additionally by submitting written comments to us about these and other policy actions. So let's see here. For today, we've got those 10 potential policy actions based on what we've heard so far in the group and other groups, and we want to float them around for further discussion. These were the items that really rose to the top for us that would benefit from further discussion. So after I explain this process, I'm going to hand it back to Michael to walk through those, and we'll take the clarifying questions that I asked for in the chat. And then we're going to take a poll. Because polls are a lot of fun, and that poll will help sort of guide how we approach discussions around these things. So, so in essence, we want to know if these 10 things that we're about to show you make sense for us to focus our time on, or if you have any other ideas that you want to share, and based on that, we'll allocate time. All right, so move to that next slide. Great. So this is what the poll is going to look like. And we're going to do what we call we're going to call a fist to 5 exercise, and we're going to use Menti for this. So in essence, fist to 5 is for each of the items, policy actions that we've got here, you're going to be asked to assign it a number. That is 0, which is the fist, and 5 being 5 fingers, and well, 4 and a thumb. And the way that it works is what you see on the screen. A fist, 0 means this idea doesn't work for me and we should discuss it. A 1 means there's major issues with this idea and we should discuss. 2 is a minor issue with this idea and we should discuss. And then 3 is, look, I see some issues. I can address those in written comments. We don't need to spend time talking about that today. 4 is, I don't have any concerns that I want to discuss today. And 5 is, hey, I like this idea as drafted. Concerns here. So for the purpose of allocating our meeting time, we're going to prioritize discussions on any items that receive a 0, 1, or 2 in the Menti. And again, we'll also have a question asked if there's other policy actions that you want to discuss. So that will be showing up as well. And yeah, before we get started on that, are there any questions about this whole FISTA 5 activity and how that's going to work? So you can go to the website that you see there on the bottom right of the screen, the www.menti.com. And Josh also sent to you in the email earlier a QR code, and he just posted that code into the chat as well. That will help you get into the Menti discussion. He also posted the link to the Menti board in the chat. Just note that you won't be able to click on that link in the chat. You actually have to copy it and paste it into your browser for it to work. But if you do that, it should work.
I will highlight, so we're going to, first step is we're actually going to go through the 10 policy, or the 10 policy actions first, and kind of talk through and see if we have any clarifying questions. And then we'll actually get into the Menti poll after that to figure out which of these policy actions we want to debate with the time we have available.
Thanks, Michael. I was jumping.
Yeah, of course. No, you're good. You're good. So we're just highlighting that this is coming up so people know. And thanks for doing that, Jessica. So if we go to the next slide, first kind of potential policy action is explore opportunities to facilitate low carbon fuel intensity fuel production facilities in Oregon. So below are some of the examples from the stickies we created in Miro during the brainstorming activities when we identify barriers and potential strategies to those barriers. When we discuss low carbon fuel development barriers and solutions, you know, a lot of the conversation we had was around a need for greater fuel supply and the fact that we're competing with other states or jurisdictions for the limited available supply of low carbon fuels that do exist. We heard an interest in producing some of these fuels within the state. We also heard a lot of feedback around that it's challenging to site facilities in Oregon. And just kind of we heard generally a need for improvement or reform of the permitting and siting process, but we didn't get a lot of specifics on what's needed to be reformed. Is it environmental regulations? Is it the public process? What needs to be changed? And so this is kind of a general action highlighting the need to further examine the issue. And that evaluation in itself could include reviewing siting and permitting requirements at the state and local level, identification of barriers that currently preventing permitting and siting of facilities, recommendation for improvements. But in this, we would also need to kind of balance consideration around kind of impact to communities, maybe some mitigation or compensation for those communities or the environment in that process. And also, but this also could be an opportunity to kind of highlight potential resiliency benefits of siting facilities in Oregon. So I will pause there. Oh, I guess I also want to highlight, this is a point of conversation also in another policy working group, the Clean Electricity and Transmission Working Group, where they're looking at a comparable draft policy around siting facilities within Oregon. So I want to pause there. Are there any clarifying questions about this potential policy action?
Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Just a quick question on process. So for example, in this one, I don't have any problem with this, but I didn't see any other action item that was talking about just exploring opportunities to increase access to low carbon fuels, period, whether they were produced in Oregon or not. Is that something that in that kind of instance, if I see something that's missing or that could be changed in this, should I put this as a 2 on this one, or should I say this is fine, but I see a gap? Like, can you just give an example of how I should be doing that? Because I can use that for future ones here too.
Yeah, that's great, Kelly. Thank you for asking that question. So for right now, we're just asking clarifying questions, but you're right. Once we go through all 10, We're going to look at that Menti poll for each one. And it's up to you. If you feel like that's something you want to bring forward to the group and select it as one because you want to offer that as an idea and get feedback on it, or if you just wanted to offer that in public comment because you think there's an opportunity where that suggestion could be incorporated within this policy action or another policy action, or if you think it should be a whole other policy action, you can certainly have that as a recommendation. I would say the advantage of highlighting that in Menti is if you want to bring that forward to the group and kind of have a conversation about it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other clarifying questions?
I don't see any right now.
That's great.
Michael.
That's great. Okay, so let's move to the next potential policy action. So it's conduct a statewide land use inventory, update the current land classification, and establish a database of land suitable for various types of renewable energy and low carbon fuel development projects. So we heard concern from this group about where to site facilities and the need to protect natural resources and communities. We took that information to other state land use agencies and certainly had conversation with them about it. And this was one of the suggestions that came out of that as a potential way to kind of address some of those concerns. By creating a renewable energy designation and land use inventory, it would allow the state to create criteria to evaluate lands and allocate resources to the energy transition. This could also help us develop that criteria to look at potential sites and give us an idea of kind of the scale of the opportunity within the state. We could create an inventory of urban lands or rural industrial zoned areas or other specific locations with existing kind of active or inactive industrial uses that could be good potential sites for low carbon fuel production facilities. This could help with kind of redevelopment of brownfields or designated areas, maybe help local jurisdictions attract industry. So there's some potential there. And this is, again, is another potential policy action that's being discussed by the Clean Electricity and Transmission Policy Working Group as well. So I will pause there and see if there's any kind of clarification questions around this potential policy action.
And I don't see any questions yet on clarifying. I'll just add, if clarifying questions come up and they're easy that you can just throw into the chat, feel free to do that and I'll share them with Michael at the time. But Michael, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or any hands raised.
That's great. We'll just keep rolling and that'll leave more time for debate and discussion at the end. So our third straw proposal item, so updating the biogas and renewable natural gas inventory report to evaluate all biogenic feedstock opportunities in the state, how they can be used for biofuels. So while discussing low carbon fuel development barriers and solutions, we certainly talked about fuel feedstocks and what's available within Oregon. We heard concerns around kind of the feasibility and economics of existing feedstocks in Oregon, what can regionally kind of collected and be used, and potentially support needed for Oregon agriculture or other potential feedstock producers. We also heard environmental concerns around the proliferation of fuel production and maybe some unintended consequences or some worries about that. And so this could be an opportunity for us to update the biogas and renewable natural gas inventory report we originally published in 2018. So this would be an opportunity for us to kind of expand and update it. So we could evaluate the feedstock resources available today, maybe give some information about how they could best be used, study kind of the financial investment or feasibility of greater biofuel development for on-site and market use, and maybe do some economic as well as energy analysis to determine what would be best to kind of support for the state and kind of identify where the opportunity is for the state. So I'll pause there and see if we have any clarifying questions about this.
I'm not seeing anything, Michael.
Sounds good. Okay, so we'll go to number 4. So funding and technical assistance for investments in fuel innovation pilot projects, such as hydrogen, biofuels, thermal energy networks, and geothermal projects. So while we had these kind of concerns around low carbon fuel development, we certainly heard from the group that we need more supply and development within Oregon. And also there's an opportunity to be a kind of a leader in this space and do some innovation. But there is a need for kind of financial or technical support to kind of show developers, the industry and utilities that this is a priority and the state's invested in it. So this could be kind of a development program that supports pilot fuel projects within Oregon. The funding could be as supportive, kind of directed at fuel production itself, maybe a fuel production tax credit or something like that. Would likely need to also balance kind of community impact and have a community engagement benefit plan, as well as maybe kind of safety and health evaluation. But certainly there's an opportunity there to potentially drive innovation projects within the state, as we kind of evaluate the potential of these projects. So I'll pause there. Do we have any questions?
I do see a hand up before I hand
Yeah.
it over to Kelly. Michael, could you define for us what TENS is, just in case people like myself who can't remember what it stands for?
Yeah, so thermal energy networks, it was something that Dan was actually describing earlier. Another pipe system using geothermal. It's an opportunity for natural gas utilities to maybe use kind of their experience in pipes to the ground or geothermal projects to use warmth or heat from the earth to be either reused to heat homes or buildings, or actually use it in industrial processes. So it's kind of taking the advantage of heat that's already in the earth and incorporating it to supplement or fully replace maybe natural gas or another fuel use.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Kelly, go ahead. Ask your question.
Sorry, just a quick question about the last two. In the presentation that we just heard, there was a lot of discussion about the ideal application of certain fuels for certain end uses, right? There was a lot of discussion about these are the fuels that are best suited in these applications because of the limited supply. They should go in these end applications. Is that something that is part of either this one or the previous one, or is that completely separate? I hadn't heard an Oregon State commitment to any sort of, these are the fuels that we think are most applicable for these uses being described, but that could inform pilots, it could inform other applications of things. And so I just wanted to find out if that was part of this or not.
Well, Kelly, it's not explicitly part of it, but maybe what you're highlighting is the need to do so, either as incorporating that within one of these actions that explicitly is trying to study that or discover what that is, and maybe set targets or set some parameters around the state, or maybe what you're suggesting is that in itself should be its own policy action as something that should be studied for the state, whether that's ODO or another entity, to better understand that. I think
Okay, thanks.
it's a really interesting idea. Yeah. And then Corianne, it looks like you've got something in the chat. Is this intended to focus on biogas RNG? Yes. Are you referring to the previous taking a look at kind of the inventory of kind of feedstocks? And I think it would certainly biogas and RNG would be a focus, but maybe that's a question for the group. Would it be limited to that, or actually looking at feedstocks for other fuels and trying to evaluate what's best to be used for biogas or maybe used for other fuels, whether it be liquid fuel production or something else?
Yeah,
So
Michael, it kind of like it compounds on like Kelly's comment too, right? I mean, like I think it's been a really, really, really long time that Oregon has had like a statewide biomass assessment, looking at all of the different resources that could be turned into fuels. And so I know that the RNG one was a really good study for the RNG biogas sector, right? But if we're looking at feedstocks for liquid biofuels, if we're looking for other replacements to renewable electricity, whatnot, I think it would be really nice to have a bigger picture assessment. And then like Kelly mentioned, what's the highest and best use?
Sure. I think that'd be great. So it sounds like it's an assessment of what we have in Oregon, and maybe creating some kind of roadmap or our path of how do you best utilize that based on research we find. That'd be great.
Yeah,
those are all great comments.
I want to say at the beginning of the Clean Fuels program, because we kind of had to mishmash some assessments, the state of Washington had done a pretty thorough biomass assessment, and so we kind of looked at what they did in Washington and tried to figure out which parts were applicable to Oregon, because Oregon did not have a comprehensive biomass assessment.
Sure. Okay. Well, so I'll flag for you. I think we're already kind of getting into like the details and debating which ones we want to move forward with and change it or improvements on it. So I guess I'll keep us moving because we're going to have another stage where we kind of debate and discuss more or how we can improve these, if that's okay. All right. So if we go to the next item. So within fuel demand, looking at the proposal item number 5. So funding and technical support for industrial and manufacturing demonstration projects, incorporating efficiency improvements and low carbon fuel technology. So we discussed kind of the demand for low carbon fuels is going to be high within industry going forward. Some will get electrified, but if you take a look at the modeling, low carbon fuels is really what's meeting most of the energy demand within the industrial sector. So there's certainly a need for education, awareness, and technical support in adoption of low carbon fuels, as well as there's still some opportunity to electrify and improve efficiency and other things like that. So how can we create a program that can offer some level of incentives? Because I think we heard from the group that we would need some level of financial support to kind of offset the cost to kind of help early adopters invest in some of these new technologies and low carbon fuels. And that there is a kind of existing a problem or a barrier that's a lack of support for decarbonization of direct use fuels, while there's kind of greater emphasis on transitioning the transportation sector. And so there's still an opportunity within direct use fuels. So this could be an example of a pilot program. We're working kind of custom solutions with industrial organizations, kind of support developing pilot projects, kind of proof of concept projects, and then hopefully using that information to kind of help with proliferation of the state as other people kind of see the opportunity. You know, it is maybe an initial piece of kind of a larger, Dan was talking about kind of larger industrial decarbonization program. So this would be maybe like a smaller version of a state level program. Does anybody have any questions?
Michael, I don't see specific questions around this item in the chat.
Great.
I did want to note quickly that Kara and Kelly have a comment in the chat. When we get to the end of these items, when we get to all 10, I'll open it up to see if they want to add their comment in still. So
Sure. That's great. Okay, so if we go to the next straw proposal item. So it's how to study how to improve and decarbonize fuel energy storage across state to improve statewide resilience. So we discussed a lot of the need around resilience and safety for energy choices. In particular, I know there's a lot of concern around the use of fuel to kind of support our growing electricity grid and kind of our dependence on that, and also the feasibility of creating a greater capacity, more fuel facilities, but they're actually used less. So the total capacity grows, but the volume of the fuel we actually use declines. And there's some concern about kind of the feasibility of that. But also, we can certainly see there's we need that to maintain the resiliency. And another thing to identify is the Oregon Energy Security Plan that was published last September. One of the takeaways with that, there was an evaluation of kind of fuel storage around the state, and certainly identified the need for greater kind of dispersed fuel storage around the state. So this would be kind of an opportunity for us to incorporate kind of the findings from the Oregon Energy Security Plan, as well as the energy strategy, and look at what are some decarbonized fuel solutions that, you know, apply to what we need now, would set us up well for an emergency event, but also look to the future and what are some decarbonized options that would set us up well and hopefully have a positive impact on communities throughout the state. Are there any questions about that proposal? Okay, hearing none, we just go right to 7. I'm sorry, Jessica?
not seeing anything. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so 7. So revise integrated resource planning regulatory framework for natural gas utilities, allowing them to develop innovation plans that meet greenhouse gas reduction targets through new resource projects. So hydrogen, thermal energy networks, geothermal, other innovations, providing greater flexibility and regulatory clarity on resource procurement, project prudence evaluation, and cost recovery for utilities. So I know when we had this conversation, we certainly got a lot of feedback from our representative of natural gas industry, letting us know that, you know, it's a real challenge for them to procure resources when it would help them if they had greater regulatory flexibility, if there's better clarification of existing policy targets and kind of their relationship to resource procurement, as well as kind of a greater clarity around from the state on cost recovery. So this could be a channel for natural gas utilities to kind of propose innovative low carbon fuel projects within a framework that has clear qualifications on risk, costs, and use of ratepayer funds to do so. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions about this.
Michael, I'm not seeing any questions about this one, but Rebecca did have a question on the previous one. So Rebecca, would you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, please, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you. And can you go back to that slide? Oh, look at that. Yeah, so looking at this, it seems like there is too much of an emphasis on storage specifically. And I think instead the focus should be on connecting low carbon fuels and energy resilience. The how, of course, could include storage, but I don't think that we should assume that that will be the end all be all.
Sure. I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah, and we can kind of debate. I guess the next thing we debate the value of that, or what changes we want to make. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the comment. Okay, so I guess that's 7. So now we're on 8. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so integrate electric and natural gas resource planning to support the timely and orderly shift to electricity and clean fuels that prioritize an equitable transition to explicitly include environmental justice communities. So in our discussions, we identified the challenge for natural gas utilities to conduct long-term planning in kind of the changing energy landscape. Without electric utility planning information and data, we heard it was challenging to estimate potential customer electrification or how customer demand may change over time while wanting to maintain energy resilience for all their customers. So the Oregon Public Utility Commission could help negotiate long-term planning with utilities as they kind of conduct dual system planning. This action will actually support strategic transition, hopefully align utility planning, and help Oregon customers in the long run. And I do want to highlight this is another potential policy action that's come up in the Clean Electricity and Transmission Policy Working Group as well. Yeah, are there any questions about this?
I'm not seeing any, and I just want to flag Rebecca and a few others have been throwing comments in here and capturing those. They're not as much focused on clarity. So right now, I just want people to know we're trying to give you the lay of the land, but we will open these up for more discussion in just a minute. I promise.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's go to 9, and we'll try to hurry through the last couple here so we can get into kind of that debate. And it sounds like people are interested to do so. So investigate and implement performance-based rate making for natural gas and electric utilities. So this idea didn't come directly from our brainstorming, but it did come up again in the Clean Electricity Generation and Transmission group. And I wanted to bring it forward to this group to get your thoughts. So Oregon Public Utility Commission currently uses some performance measures to kind of drive change or as a tool to provide some financial incentives or penalties to drive change in utilities. This would be doing it even more. So for example, the PUC could set targets for strategic electrification or to pursue other kind of non-pipe alternatives or set some kind of targets to do so and maybe change the distribution infrastructure to support decarbonization. So if there are certain targets or goals they want to hit, they would then use these performance-based rate making to either have an incentive to do so or some kind of penalty. And so that's a potential policy action. And I will jump to the next one, assuming there's no questions. And the last one is funding a consumer-facing energy transition service program to educate and financially support residential and commercial building conversions from primarily natural gas, propane, or oil heat to efficient electric options owned or operated in low-income, rural, or disadvantaged communities. So we certainly had a lot of conversation around consumer barriers to electrification and changing the way fuels are used within buildings. There's certainly a lot of concern around the cost of doing so, affordability, and creating greater energy burden for a lot of Oregonians. And it was highlighted kind of the need for education and awareness building to support behavior change, and also recognizing that behavior change may take a long time and be a real challenge. And so this also came up in the Environmental Justice and Equity Policy Working Group, and wanting to make sure that as there's a transition, we aren't leaving communities behind. What level of support can we offer them? And also recognizing that energy is already becoming a lot more expensive for Oregon consumers, and we need to consider policies and resources that can support these communities that are most vulnerable to these potential changes. Yeah, do we have any questions about that before we?
I don't see anything on that.
Okay.
So I was going to suggest before we dive into the polling, Michael, just to give a chance, we had a comment from Kara and from Kelly that I think is really relevant to point out, because we asked people if there were gaps, and I think that they have identified a gap that they would like to point out. So what Kara wrote was, I was hoping that this energy strategy would help, she said, do that for us, but what she means by that is like sort of identifying the best uses for the different types of fuels for state future needs of low carbon fuels. And she said, do we not expect to have an outcome that will help decision makers and businesses understand where these low carbon fuels are best used? And Kelly followed up saying she was thinking the same thing, but didn't see that in the 10 proposed items, which is why she asked. So I just want to open it up quickly for Kara and Kelly, if you wanted to expand on that at all, or if anybody else wanted to comment on that particular item.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add that what's hard about this, and this is not a criticism, it has to be how it is, but is that we are segmented into these work groups, right, that are cross-cutting, and you know that. But I'm just thinking about, like, decarbonizing our buildings. What is that going to look like? What is that going to take? Presumably, the modeling will inform sort of what policy recommendations are made. And we see, and it's consistent with other models that have occurred, that building electrification is the cheapest and easiest way to decarbonize buildings for the most part. So I would expect then that low carbon fuels, naturally, the decisions will be, how do we get those low carbon fuels to the places that are the highest and best use? But I think maybe if that isn't a piece of this, so I guess I thought that might already be the outcome of the energy strategy. What are the highest and best uses of those low carbon fuels by virtue of the modeling and by virtue of the work that's being done in the other work groups?
So I think I agree with you that that is going to come out of the buildings work group, and I want to highlight the buildings policy working group is going to meet next week, I believe on the 7th. And so if people have an interest in that, I would certainly highlight attending that meeting. Hopefully there'll be some great insights and some good conversations around that. I think generally speaking, we can speak at a high level and use the modeling and say, here's the opportunity to use fuels, and here's some recommendations from the other model of best uses, as you were saying, what's hard to electrify. That's a great low carbon fuel solution. I guess I'm envisioning in these kind of policy actions greater specifics on, what particular fuel would be best, a best application based on kind of the existing resources we have. The model is looking at things at such a high level. I was hoping that additional study or additional information may give Oregon communities a little more detail and be less directional, more specific on what we should do. It's kind of an opportunity to dig in a little bit more. I don't know if hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. Okay.
And Michael, can I add to that, which is,
yeah, please.
These working groups, as expansive as they are, and they are, we are going to have to take all the information that we heard across all 5 of the working groups and be actively synthesizing that information along with what we saw from the model and what we're seeing in like the energy wallet results and the air quality mapping, as well as public comments and what we're hearing from the advisory group. And there's just a lot that we need to take in and then sort through and think about how these things align. And so just because there's things written here that you are interested in but aren't here, identifying that gap, just what Kara did and what Kelly did, is really helpful. Like if that's what you want to see out of this energy strategy, we want to hear that from you. I think that's a really important part of this process. So I see Kelly's hand up, and then hopefully we can move on, but just flagging that. Share with us what you want to get out of this energy strategy. That's a critical piece of information for us. Kelly, go ahead.
I don't want to belabor this point. I just wanted to say that as somebody who was just, trying to decide what infrastructure should be placed in different businesses, understanding where future policy may incentivize or disincentivize things over time would be really helpful. So having that highest and best use of this fuel in this application, for example, there are transit agencies that are making decisions to switch to RNG, but if there's limited supplies of RNG and that's not going to be an incentivized use in the future, and it is incentivized right now because it's under the Oregon Clean Fuels program, whereas there's not stationary application incentives for those low carbon fuels now, but there may be in the future because that's not an ideal application of that fuel. That's something that is a mismatch right now with where the incentives are, and it's causing major investments of dollars to upgrade shops and fleets and things like that that might not be very long lived. So that's a kind of a practical application of where I think that could be really helpful guidance to businesses and entities in Oregon.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment. Thank you, Kelly. And I guess this is kind of a great segue to kind of this slide and acknowledging that this isn't exhaustive. So we're tasked with kind of highlighting the most feasible policy actions that we could address to kind of would address kind of the barriers that have come up to this meeting up to this point, or this group. And we're also trying to manage, as Jessica said, kind of the number of draft policy actions coming out of each working group. With 5 working groups, the potential to have a lot of policy actions. And so we need your guidance to be selective. So if there's some of these policy actions that you don't think would be as valuable, but maybe an alternative would be, I mean, what I'm hearing from Kelly, I guess I'm hearing something about kind of like a roadmap of kind of what fuels look like in maybe the near to midterm, of kind of how they'd be used, and some policy direction with that maybe that would be helpful. And certainly a lot of different policy ideas have come up in our discussions. I certainly want to recognize, we've talked about kind of workforce development has come up as a barrier, and we really haven't identified strategies to address that yet. So maybe there's an opportunity in one of these existing policy actions to incorporate it, or something else new. I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts around that. We've certainly heard recommendations and opposition to changing the statewide renewable fuel standard. And so I certainly want to acknowledge that's been part of the conversation. These have all been great ideas. We're just trying to pick, or I guess ask you to kind of help us be selective and pick what would be, give us the best bang for our buck and be most feasible for us to implement at a state level. So, and if we have time, we'll kind of go through these existing policies. If we have time at the end to talk kind of generally of other ideas, we can get into that, or please submit public comments and add, and we'd love to hear it. So Jessica, can you take us, set us up for the Menti poll?
Yep, I am happy to do so. So it's on here. Josh, why don't you go ahead and pull up the Menti poll. I'll just remind folks that Josh threw a link into the chat that you can't click on it, even though it looks like you can click on it. But if you copy and paste it in, you can get there. And if you go to the email that Josh sent, there's a QR code in there for it. And is anyone having trouble getting into the Menti poll? Thanks for sharing that, Josh. Great. Okay, so the first Menti poll, this is the FIST to 5 activity. So I see some of you are already in there voting. Way to go, early starters. remember that 0 is where you feel like this idea doesn't work for you at all. A 1 would be major issues with the idea and you want to discuss. 2 is minor issues and want to discuss. 3 minor issues, but you can address later in comments. 4 is I don't have any concerns I want to discuss. And 5 is I like this idea. So if you want to take a moment to select your vote, and just a note that with the Menti poll, you've got this moment in time to vote right now. And then once we move to the next question, it goes away. It's just a quirk of the poll. So you want to make sure you get your login of where you feel on this in the time. And Josh has kindly thrown up the time to respond up on the video so you can see it's at 20 seconds and counting right now. So yeah, jump in there and get the vote. And this, again, this is going to help us figure out what to prioritize in our discussions going forward. So, and I think that looks good. I think that's the number we're expecting to see. So we'll move on to the next item. So this is about conducting a statewide land use inventory, update the current land classification, and establish a database of land suitable for various types of renewable energy and low carbon fuel development projects. So again, one we share with the electricity working group. So you want to dive in here and do your fist to 5 activity. There's 30 seconds on the board. And if any questions pop up, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute, and we'll try to address them in the moment if we can. Great. So I think that is it, Josh, for respondents. So we could probably move on. Fabulous. All right, so the next one, update and expand the biogas and renewable natural gas inventory report to evaluate all biogenic feedstock opportunities in the state and how they can be used for biofuels. Ten seconds left. All right, our next one is funding and technical assistance for investments in fuel innovation pilot projects such as hydrogen. I can't talk, such as hydrogen, biofuels, thermal energy networks, and geothermal projects. All right, about 5 seconds left. Moving on. Okay, this one is around funding and technical support for industrial and manufacturing demonstration projects, incorporating efficiency improvements, incorporating efficiency improvements and low carbon fuel technology. We've got about 10 seconds left. All right, moving on. So this one is exploring opportunities to facilitate low carbon intensity fuel production facilities in Oregon.
Isn't this the same as number 1? Didn't we do this one already?
Michael, are we crazy?
I thought this was supposed to be
Uh-oh,
number
looks like
6.
yeah, it looks like maybe there's an error in here. So it should be study how to improve and decarbonize fuel energy storage across the state to improve
I thought we
statewide
were on
resilience.
storage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, did the poll start over by any chance? I'm a little worried now. We got Josh working in concert to get us back where we need to be.
It looks like just somehow that one was duplicated somehow.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, folks.
All right. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Okay, so this one is around fuel demand, revise integrated resource planning regulatory framework for natural gas utilities, allowing them to develop innovation plans that meet greenhouse gas reduction targets through new resource projects, hydrogen, thermal energy networks, geothermal, or other innovations, providing greater flexibility and regulatory clarity on resource procurement, project prudence evaluation, and cost recovery for utilities. And I see Devin asking if we skipped 6. We'll have Josh working in the background to make sure we capture all of them, and he can move us back to 1 if we missed it. Okay, we've got about 10 seconds left. Moving on. All right, this one is on integrating electric and natural gas resource planning to support the timely and orderly shift to electricity and clean fuels, while prioritizing an equitable transition to explicitly include environmental justice communities. So we've lost our timer, Josh. 10 seconds to go. Okay, next, investigate and implement performance-based rate making for natural gas and electric utilities. Another one that we're sharing with the electricity working group. At 10 seconds. Okay. And then fund a consumer-facing energy transition service program to educate and financially support residential and commercial building conversions from primarily natural gas, propane, or oil heat to efficient electric options owned or operated in low-income, rural, and disadvantaged communities. Okay, about 5 seconds to go. Oh, everybody must have finished. Michael, I'm wondering if we can share the language around the one that got skipped and then have people vote 0 through 5 in the chat, maybe?
Yeah. So that was study how to improve and decarbonize fuel energy storage across the state to improve statewide resilience. And we can also, as we go back through, we can pause on that one and see if anybody has any feedback too. So it looks like we've got about 45 minutes. So we could just jump back to and start with our first one. It looks like we just got a bunch of kind of number twos. So some minor suggestions. So we might be able to roll through these kind of quickly and get into maybe an open space to talk about some other ideas that haven't come up yet.
And I'll just add, Michael, what we usually do, just so you know, is we ask for the folks that had those concerns to share them with the group more broadly so that we can chat about them and maybe come up with ideas to resolve some of those things. So I think that the question around the renewable fuel standard for stationary use, that is oh, I'm sorry, this is additional topics for the discussion with the group. I'm so sorry to say.
Yeah, it's great. It's good to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're ready to. Can we jump back over to the?
Yeah. And
slide
while
deck?
we jump back over to that, I'll just share that Rebecca just threw into the chat that she suggested this for the transportation electrification working group, but that the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance would like to see a capacity credit added to the Clean Fuels program to help fund hydrogen fueling stations and other fueling infrastructure. So just wanted to throw that one out there as well.
That's great.
And thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, so the first one that came up was we had some minor concern, or one person had a thought about exploring opportunities to facilitate low carbon intensity fuel production facilities in Oregon. Does that person want to bring forward their idea or suggestion around it? And Josh, could we go to the next slide? One more. That'd be great. Thank you.
I see Kelly has her hand raised. Kelly, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I give this one a 2, and not because I don't support this. I think that we should be figuring out how we can get more low carbon fuels to market. I think supply is the main issue rather than demand. I think there's plenty of demand and it's growing nationally and across states. And so I'm not seeing demand as being the primary issue. I'm seeing supply. So I do support figuring out where we can promote development in Oregon, but I also think we should, even a bigger issue to me is how do we promote supply availability for Oregon businesses, not just supply produced in the state. So that's my minor issue. It's not, I think that's a bigger issue than this, but this is also important.
Yeah, so it's the distribution and access to these fuels around the state. So could this be an evaluation of how to promote within the state, but also look at how to expand distribution and access around the state?
Yeah,
I think that'd be a great, if you want to add that to your public comments or language you'd like to add to this. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I see Devin's hands raised. Devin, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I apologize, I'm in an airport right now, so hopefully it's not too much noise in the background. But basically, I think, and I may be missing the mark on this entirely, but when I see low carbon intensity fuel production, I think one of my biggest fears is I don't want, based on a policy side of it, to kind of pre-select winners and losers on the different types of feedstocks. So I think there can be value in all types of feedstocks, and I think having some recognition on the carbon intensity could be valuable. But certain programs I know will dramatically skew the valuation on one versus the other, and so I just would advise caution on that and making sure that we're not pre-selecting winners and losers.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for your comment, Devin. It's great.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I will. Devin got it before I even got a chance to remind him. If there are any other questions, raise your hand or throw them into the chat, or else we may move on from here.
Yeah, so our next one, the statewide land use inventory, it looks like we did get a number 2 for this one as well. Does that person who gave this a number 2, if we could change next slide, please, if we could see who gave this a number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you go back. Thank you.
I don't know if we lost anybody, Michael, since we did this, but if you had if you voted a 0, 1, or 2 on this particular policy action that you see on your screen, we'd love to hear from you what the concerns are, so that we can capture that information and maybe have the group think about ways to address that concern.
Okay, well, we can come back to it if somebody wants to raise their hand.
Kelly just came on camera.
Oh.
I think.
I didn't vote this down, but I just had a question about who would have access to this database and where would it live. Those were the initial thoughts that I had, but I didn't vote for it as a 2. I think I put it up higher, but thanks.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So this would be public information. So this would be land use inventory that the state conducts, and it would be publicly available. And the idea would be to collect this information and share it out with the public, with local jurisdiction to help, I guess, people better understand what the opportunity would be or where facilities might be located. When we talked to Business Oregon about it, they saw this as maybe an opportunity that they could do some economic development, maybe working with local jurisdictions that have existing kind of industrial sites or brownfields, and they could use that, selecting these sites to then figure out, based on that siting, what would be a good maybe renewable energy facility for that area or an opportunity, and then work with that local jurisdiction to maybe attract some development there.
Thanks, Michael. I see Kara's hand went up, so maybe Kara wants to add to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also, I think, put it higher, but if you can audit us, you should just call us out if one of us did put a 2 in there and we've just forgotten. But I like this idea particularly because it's consistent with many of the efforts that folks are making. For example, the renewable siting rulemaking group that is trying to figure out like where is best to put renewable energy. Can we agree, right, to sort of limit conflicts? And then it's also consistent with thinking about, I think in one of the previous groups we talked about renewable diesel, recognizing that there may be some places that are better than others from a broad stakeholder kind of, I think participation, that would be one of the things that either could be helpful or not. I mean, if you have more stakeholders, then you maybe have more buy-in. But if you can have it be, I don't know that there's a good way to go about it, I suppose. Because if you have an unbiased sort of decision maker, that could be good too, but just be thinking about that. But then one of the things that occurred to me is that the wildfire hazard map became extremely problematic. And so I just think we need to be probably cautious. I think in some ways, this is a great tool, useful for developers, useful for communities, potentially problematic in ways that maybe we don't have real insight into. So we just need to be thoughtful about that.
Yeah, that's a great flag. That certainly is a concern that we would create something and it would create more problems or wouldn't be used. That would be a shame. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so I guess moving on from this, I think number 3, we didn't have any 0, 1s, and 2s, but it looks like for number 4, the funding and technical assistance for investments in fuel innovation pilot projects. So it looks like we did have one number 2. Does anybody want to bring up kind of their concern or addition they'd like to make to this idea?
And in total fairness, I don't have access to who voted what. Otherwise, I'm not shy. I would call on. But please speak up. We learn more when we understand what people's concerns are around things. And this is the one that Kelly and maybe Kara to flag that they might want to add to this discussion around, do we need to focus it on just in Oregon, or do we want to discuss promoting development more broadly? I believe it was this one. And I think that's really helpful information for us. Like, as we think through these policy actions, we also want to understand what you see as some of the trade-offs, is a term of art that we've come to use. So what are the pros and the cons of different policy options? I think Kara did a really great of framing that up on the last item. Like, what are the unintended consequences of building that inventory? We should think about that. So that's helpful information for us now or through comments later. I
Okay.
don't see anything else, Michael, so maybe we move on to the next one.
Yeah, could we jump to number 7, the revised integrated resource planning regulatory framework? This is right there. So it looked like we had 4 number 2s. So maybe an active debater or some improvement opportunities with this one. I'd love to hear some thoughts.
Kara's right in there. Go for it, Kara.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not hearing Kara. Are you?
I'm not.
Oh, Kara might be having, how about this? Kara, hang on. And Brittany has her hand raised. So while Kara fixes that, Brittany, go ahead.
Okay. First off, thank you all. We're so excited to see this. We think out of all the things you put in here, this is the number 1 thing that will help us on the utility side make progress, which is so exciting. I'm being a little nitpicky here. So I had a couple things. One is RNG wasn't listed in the list. So if you could add that, that would be awesome. 2, I think this would not only be like the natural gas side of things, but the electrics also would love regulatory certainty for any of their renewable projects. So just wanted to make that comment as well to expand that across the aisle. And then 3, there was one more thing I wanted to be nitpicky about. What was it? Oh, not like the word innovation. I don't think it's meant to be this way. I think it's this whole thing's great, but I just wanted to make sure that ensure that it's not just like innovative new things, but also like, we are able to produce renewables even in the traditional sense. So like RNG that's already available and hydrogen that's already available. So that was my 3 little tiny nitpicky things.
That's great. Thank you, Brittany. Cara, we were able to address.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. So same with Brittany. This should be integrated resource planning that is combined, and so you have that in the next one. So that's why I didn't know. I forgot that was coming. But really, the 2 overlap. So this one is integrated resource planning. That already exists. What we need is a resource planning that allows for natural gas and electric utilities to assess what are the best what's the demand, and what are the best ways we're going to meet that demand in the best low carbon method possible. So I actually don't think you need the next one if this one captures that. And I will say that there already is this, and I think the commissioners and folks on the commission staff would say there already is this integrated resource planning framework. There already is an opportunity to develop plans. I mean, they have to, as the economic regulator, protect against cost and risk, and we want those protections in place. So I don't think we want them on both the electric and the gas side, right? So I don't know that we want to necessarily, I wouldn't recommend that we necessarily mess with the existing framework, other than there needs to be an opportunity for gas utilities to swap information with electric utilities and vice versa, or integrated planning of the energy system writ large. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. And I guess I would want to make the space. Brittany, I know you were just talking about this. So do you see that as 2 separate things, or is there something within this that would add something that doesn't exist within the current IRP process?
Oh man, I'm gonna pass this one to Devin really soon. So Devin, you're on board. Be ready. Devin and I both are in an airport because we're at the Biogas Americas this week. So if you see that, that's what's going on for me too. Anyways, but yeah, for the integrated resource planning, I think I agree that this one, like if it had integrated dual resource planning, that could be covered all in one. I do think it's such an important point though, because we're not doing it currently. So I think it is good to kind of call it out separately. But I agree with Kara that it technically should be in this one. But yeah, I think it's good to call it out separately. I don't know. Devin, you're far more versed in integrated resource planning than I. So I'm going to pass it over to you on like what is existing, happening, and what gaps need to be filled, because I know you will have more answers there than I.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the floor if everybody's okay with that. Yeah, so I think I was in the IRP world before I kind of moved over to the renewables for quite a while. So, yeah, I think we're getting there. I think in this cycle of IRPs, we're seeing a lot of encouragement for a lot of these items, but I think codifying it would be quite useful. I'll give an example of one that we're actually talking about right now. Is we kind of introduced in our most recent, kind of near the end of our IRP update, an idea that we wanted to submit for acknowledgement, something on our idea of what our God, I can't believe I'm blanking on this. It's been a lot of week of travel, so I apologize for that. But it was a big part of our renewables procurement process. And to my knowledge, through the IRPs, it's not really there's not a lot of strong framework for handling renewables, because a lot of the IRP rules didn't really have renewables as a subject matter when they came up. And I know IRP rulemaking is something already coming up. What I think the value of this is just kind of strengthening and encouraging that within that rulemaking process, that the renewables and renewables planning and the framework for which utilities will be evaluated, the rules of the game, if you want to call it that, I think that's valuable. And then one other thing I also just want to kind of caution, I think I talked about this one of the other meetings, and this is kind of anecdotal, but I think it's important, is for us specifically, being that we're in a very rural service territory, there are challenges sometimes with dealing with local PUDs, not having the same rigorous planning requirements as us. Sometimes they don't even know what they don't know, to be entirely honest. So I think that can be a caution. I still think it doesn't mean, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We absolutely should be encouraging this kind of co-planning, but I think there might need to be some grace and some understanding that they're going to have some challenges getting up to speed to get to the point. And so kind of encouraging that might be a good first step as well.
That's great. That's great feedback for us. Okay.
And Michael, Kara's hand is up, so I'm wondering if
Kara.
he wants to add to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. What the point that that Devin just made is, I think, really important, because this isn't just the Public Utility Commission that only has oversight over those investor-owned utilities. We should be thinking about how we can help PUDs, consumer-owned utilities, meet the moment too, right? And while they get their power mostly through BPA, we have to, as a result, they also don't have like the Energy Trust of Oregon resource that that folks who are consumers of investor-owned utilities have. And let's be thinking about this with an eye towards funding or supporting better planning and energy efficiency opportunities, and the potential, if there is an opportunity for low carbon fuels in those areas that are outside of investor-owned utility territory, to be thinking about that.
Sure.
Thanks, Kara. Kelly, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Sure, I was going to save my comment for the next one because it's really about the joint planning. But since we're talking about it right now, I think the point that has been made is really important, right? Like it depends. So, I'm a consumer-owned utility, but we're one of the largest in the state. The rest of them are very small and get their power exclusively from Bonneville Power Administration. So I think that the co-planning is really helpful. and in different applications is used for different things, right? There is a how are we going to lower the carbon intensity of the electricity sources? And that's really important for the investor-owned utilities to focus on. That's less so for the consumer-owned utilities because they either get their power directly from BPA and they don't have any responsibility for investment in new power resources. However, if you ignore the rest of the equation, which is the demand side, then you're missing a bunch of opportunity to take action. And that's where a bunch of the consumer-owned utilities have an opportunity to really look at load forecasting and how are we going to manage our demand side resources? What can we put in place to address demand? And where can we be planning with our natural gas counterparts on what that demand looks like and how do we manage resiliency and availability of resource over time? And if we just make this co-planning, it's really challenging because if you just make the co-planning requirement through the PUC, then you miss out on all of the consumer-owned utilities. But the consumer-owned utilities often don't have the same staffing levels as the investor-owned utilities. And to Devin's point, may need an opportunity to be brought up to speed. So there's some technical assistance that might be needed to be brought into there. They don't often do the planning at the same intervals as the IOUs. So there are a number of issues there that would need to be worked out, but I do think that it's really important to continue to co-plan for that demand side piece of the equation.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. So it sounds like we've already moved on to our kind of the next draft policy action. So it sounds like we've kind of addressed this one. So just in the interest of time, I guess I would have us move to this one or the next one. I'm sorry. Investigate, implement performance-based rate making for natural gas and electric utilities. It looked like we did get a couple of people with some twos on this one. So does anybody have any suggestions or comments on performance-based rate making?
Michael, Devin's got his hand raised, and then Kara.
Please, Devin.
Yeah, thank you. And I was really heartened to hear the way that this was structured and discussed. I think the one point that I really want to emphasize is my personal opinion of what innovates, which gives the most innovation and encourages utilities to really do the best for their ratepayers, I believe, is carrot and stick form of incentive. You know, I know in Washington, there's a lot floating around in some of their cap and invest stuff that they're kind of talking about really a performance-based rate making where it's only disincentives or negatives for not meeting certain metrics with no incentive for meeting certain metrics. And I think the way that you really get the best bang for the buck for our ratepayers is allowing some participation as well as punishing for imprudent actions or ones that don't meet a certain metric. So I think there's a lot more to flesh out around that still, but I think conceptually I really want to hammer that. I think it's a super important point to look at it with a carrot and stick mentality.
That's great insight. Thank you, Devin. And yeah, if you have any recommendations on additional language or building this out more so it is explicitly gives that direction. I appreciate any recommendation you might have.
I think a good place to start is, and it's been a while since I've acted in that world, but I know I believe it's the PGA world, the way it currently works is if utilities, and once again, forgive my ignorance on this, and I can do a little more research if it would help, but I believe utilities are asked to use NYMEX Henry Hub as kind of a baseline for performance. And if you're able to beat that pricing, utilities I think they're actually allowed to choose their level of participation anywhere from 10 to 30%. And so you get that participation. So if let's say the metric is $5 per metric ton or per MMBTU, I'm doing too much renewables. So if it's $5 per MMBTU and your weighted average cost of gas is $4.50, you get 50% times whatever that level of participation that you've chosen beforehand. And it's one that I think we had to choose them at day one. You can't just bounce around based on, I think I'm going to have a good year. I think I'm going to have a bad year. You have to really kind of lock in that level of participation. And then the flip side is true as well. If you end up at $5.50 when the metric is $5, thank you, Barry. I'm terrible about using acronyms. I apologize for that. But then, yeah, if you're at $5.50 and the baseline is $5, your utility shareholders have to eat 30% of that 50% lack of performance. I think that's kind of a decent place to start. That's one that I think as a solid risk sharing mechanism.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. And then, Kara, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to caution about this one because I think it can be viewed as sort of like, yes, let's just do this. You're incentivizing utilities to perform well in the way you want them to. And there is I'm not sure actually where it's gone, but there is a bill that was in the legislature encouraging the PUC to study performance-based rate making. And I would say investigate is fine. I don't know that we necessarily want to say, yes, implement or a requirement to implement. I think it depends on what it is that we're gaining and sort of how holistic it is, or maybe we want to identify specific mechanisms. So performance incentive mechanisms is another way to go at it. So just a much more sort of narrow focus. We want to achieve this, so therefore let's implement this. I mean, the problem with any kind of structured rules is that human beings love to figure out the ways to get around them. And so that's the, I mean, you know, utilities are businesses, they're going to try and figure out, and it's no, I'm not trying to throw shade, but it's just the way it is. You're trying to make money, and you're going to try and figure out the way to do that by getting around whatever, you know, the barrier is that's been put in place. So it's not the end all be all. It could potentially be a good tool. The state of Hawaii is farthest along here, and we aren't yet in a position where we can see if their set of rules is working. I think it's a really good idea to think about for natural gas utilities. We want them to engage in certain behavior. The behavior they're doing now does not meet the climate policy goals of the state. How can we get them to do the thing we want them to do? That to me feels like a natural place to do it. It's harder with the electric utilities.
Sure. Great. Thank you for those comments.
Yeah, that was really helpful, Kara. Appreciate that. I don't see anything else, Michael. So
Okay.
just time check, we have about 17 minutes till the end of the meeting. So
Yeah. So if we go to our last one, and then we could have a little bit of time at the end here. So this one's around kind of funding a consumer-facing energy transition service program. Oh, looks like Rebecca's got her hands up.
yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
There's the unmute button. Thank you. I just wanted to also throw out there that this is a good opportunity to revisit the idea of utility decoupling, which has been a great tool for encouraging efficiency. Decarbonization now is certainly the priority, and it's no longer one-to-one necessarily with efficiency. So I think that there's still that decoupling can provide that value as keeping that efficiency piece of the discussion included.
And when you're talking about decoupling, Rebecca, are you talking about decoupling kind of revenue from customer growth and infrastructure and other ways of kind of generating revenue and finding other means of revenue for like natural gas utilities? Or is that what you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely. That idea that, you know, IOUs it's in their economic best interest for shareholders to continue to, you know, gold plate services and to sell more kilowatt hours.
Yeah. Okay.
And Michael, it looks like Devin might want to add something to that. His hand is up. Go ahead, Devin.
Oh,
Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing the stage here. But I looked at Brittany and she said it's okay if I speak, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. This is a little bit of a soapbox thing for me, but it's something I do think is really important. I'm kind of passionate about. Is, you know, we're seeing, this was talked about a little bit earlier, but we're really seeing a lot of electricity demand increase. A lot of that's driven, as was kind of alluded to earlier, by the AI data centers. It's going to have a lot of electric growth, and we're seeing, at least regionally, an increase in gas-fired generation plants. I think that's become a big thing. So the one thing I really want to caution in this vein is I'm not conceptually against this, but with direct use efficiencies or inefficiencies from taking away from direct use and then having that fueled by gas-fired efficiency, there is a trapping that one could fall into where you're increasing emissions by having indirect electricity that's being fueled by natural gas that defeats the purpose of what you're trying to solve. So just when we're doing something like this, that emphasis on really trying to make sure that it is truly green resources that are being used to fuel that electricity for this electrification, I think is an important consideration that needs to be ensured, since the economics have changed around things like AI for electric growth before we really go so gung-ho about this.
Sure. That certainly makes sense. And I think that's been part of the conversation within the Clean Electricity and Transmission Policy Working Group. So hopefully we'll see some interesting potential policy actions coming out of that group that may address what you're describing. Okay, but I guess we've got the funding and consumer-facing energy transition service program, and this was kind of highlighting the potential need for a lot of communities within Oregon some help with transitioning, whether it is electrification or efficiency or other kind of changes. And so, Devin, I think you're highlighting, be careful before you make that transition. But I guess in itself, this action, so maybe you would include something about making sure it's clean electricity that people are transitioning to. Could be some language here, but is there any kind of feedback around or concerns around this idea or a transition services program?
Brittany's hand's raised. Go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany.
Okay, this is like a half-baked comment, so let's see how it comes out. So the main thing that I'm not seeing this address is the cost of energy increasing and that implication to our business owners. So yes, there is some energy transition service programs, but also our businesses are going to end up paying like a higher cost of energy as we transition to renewables. No matter what renewables you pick, they're just higher cost. And so that is not addressed here. So I was just wanted to make that comment that I think that issue still is there. Especially like for example, we're seeing the CVP program start, and that is going to increase the cost for businesses operating in Oregon. So anyways, that is one thing I would like to just bring up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you have language change recommendations of how to be expansive or to incorporate that within this, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's why I was kind of like, I had this half-baked idea because I wish I could come with a problem and a solution. Maybe this is a place for a conversation on like cap and trade programs that provide that market base for carbon trading. But yeah, I'm not sure how else policy could help with that. Just anyone else on the call here might have some suggestions.
Brittany's doing my job for me, which I totally appreciate. While you're sitting in an airport, no less. That's awesome.
I'm just delegating after a week of hiring people.
No, I love it. Kara raised her hand, so maybe she has some ideas.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Brittany. I mean, it absolutely is I think probably the building electrification crew is talking about the cost of, or the building work group, and then there's probably some other work groups. I think affordability is absolutely going to be something that we have to be thinking about. And there are mechanisms that the PUC can use to protect customers, to keep energy affordable. What I come up against always when I think about affordability is we talk about affordability now, and we're not thinking about if we don't address our emissions now, what the costs are going to look like in the future. And I can tell you that they are not going to go down. They're not going to go away. So it's sort of a little bit biting the bullet and figuring out the best way to cushion folks who are least able to bear that burden. But we just have to reduce our emissions. And there's no question that the data center and the AI boom is not helping that situation, which is why we need the gas utilities on board to help our electric utilities decarbonize. And the ways that I'm seeing that are really exciting are those, the thermal energy networks is, I think, the one place that looks really like an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to jump in and say I really appreciate the comments from Devin and Brittany and Kara and Kelly and throughout the course of this meeting, because I see that there are places that we are all feeling like there's things that need to be looked at more in depth, things that need to be researched and brought to light so that we can make some better choices about fuels in the future. And that's I think that's something that I really want to be able to hear from all of you, is sort of like where some of those points are where decisions need to get made, and then where things you feel like we need more information, we need more study, or we need more input from technical experts or people in communities to be able to make better decisions, to avoid some of those unintended consequences. So I see whatever I've said has spurred Kara and Antonio to raise their hands, which is exactly what I was hoping. So Kara, please jump in.
Well, and I want to hear what Antonio has said, but one thing that I'll just mention is that the valuable thing about something like this, and I think, ETO is one great place, and then the other place, I know Odo is sort of set up for the one-stop shop, and maybe there's going to be a 2.0. I mean, the value of that is that not only do we need to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions, but we're going to have to adapt. We are absolutely going to have to adapt. And so if we can get people the cooling that they're going to need in the most efficient way possible, that's a pretty big win.
Thanks, Kara. Antonio, what do you got for us?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we hear you. Huh?
Very good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment. Really, we would support a study where we can understand the logistics of the current energy infrastructure. And why do I say that? Is because, if we understand what we have, we can understand a little bit better the consequences or outcomes as we discuss, trying to shift and transition into, cleaner sources of energy. I don't know if this group knows this very well, but the renewables effort, it's not really right now a money maker. It's really difficult. I heard someone saying that the product is out there, and it's hard to get it to places. Well, it is out there. It has a price premium, but at the same time, with the low incentive to produce it, it may not be there anymore or as abundantly as it is right now. So last week, a refinery signaled that they're going to idle. In the West Coast, there's another refinery that will idle later this year. So really, there's very complex challenges when it comes to energy production, because then there's a natural supply and demand market competition that is going to dictate where these fuels are going to go. In order to go into a transition, you need more energy. You need a lot of energy available in order to transition. Unfortunately, this high regulation in California, states like Oregon and Washington, are taking the incentive for these companies, oil producing companies, to be able to stay afloat in the West Coast, and then they are shutting down. This is happening. So these facilities are not solely producers of gasoline and diesel. They're also integral to the supply of jet fuel, lubricants, petrochemicals, and the expanding portfolio of low carbon fuels, right? So premature closures without adequate alternatives in place could lead to supply disruptions and economic strain, especially in regions where demand for liquid fuels remains high, making these plants in the future completely obsolete and not able or possible to happen. So everything that we've been discussing today, the 2 to 3 hours that we're going to spend on this, would be for nothing if we don't have an ability to jump in transition. and transition. So rather than viewing refineries as outdated infrastructure, we should consider their potential to be retooled and modernized to support cleaner fuel production. We need to really work on storage, and that's why I think storage is very important. I really think that a balanced strategy, one that leverages existing assets while accelerating the deployment of low carbon and renewable technologies, permitting reform that can allow this to happen in the states, not only in Oregon. Oregon does not have any refineries. 90% of the liquid fuels that come into Oregon, they come from Washington refineries. There's a fear that we can lose a refinery in Washington, and California has already lost 2. So 10% of that comes from California. So all this information is really scary when it comes to how are we going to have the energy. Like when we try to jump, we try to go down and then we go up. And it seems that we don't have that down force right now to be able to leverage a jump in the future with a high regulation, with a misunderstanding of the liquid fuels and renewables industry in the West Coast. So I just wanted to make sure that, that we understand that we need abundant and reliable energy if we want to transition. So I just, wanted to share that because I've heard a couple comments and I think there's this also, and it was brought up that, we need to make sure that we understand that in order to move ahead, we are not creating more contaminants, right? So sometimes because we're focusing on one state, we are regulating those companies in the state, but we are deregulating in the world. And then we're creating a worse world just because we're allowing others outside of our state to produce, but they produce in a more dirty way. So I think everything has to be considered. So, sorry, I went a little bit long.
Thanks,
No, that's great to highlight those unintended consequences, Antonio.
And
Yeah,
I'll
sorry,
just,
Jessica, go ahead.
Michael, I just wanted to thank everybody. We're at time and I'm going to pass it back to Michael to kind of wrap things up and talk about next steps. But I just want to really thank you all for the time commitment. We recognize that it was a big lift for all these meetings, and there's one more coming. And also just your time and care and providing us with additional thoughts and comments outside of this venue. All of those things are incredibly beneficial to us, and we need those perspectives in order to make sure that we have a really solid foundation around some of the drafting of recommendations that we'll be doing here very soon. So thank you again for your time, and I will pass it back to Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. So the things I would just highlight as far as next steps, I will share Dan's presentation that he gave earlier today, in case you're interested in taking a look at that. May 9th is our deadline to get some additional kind of public comments. If there's additional ideas you have, I know in the Menti poll, there a couple of people had some additional ideas for policy actions that they think should be incorporated. I know some of that was in the chat. If you do, we would like to articulate or provide some ideas, please send those to us. Please send it by May 9th. We'll take a look at those and try to incorporate what we can, or there's certainly ideas around consolidating some of the ideas, and we'll take all the public comments we can get and look at our existing policy actions and see how we can improve upon them, with the goal of presenting those on the 21st. So that is our next kind of final meeting of the policy working groups. It's a plenary meeting. We'll bring everybody together, have a conversation, and be able to share what the kind of conversations in all the groups and where we landed on some draft policy recommendations. That's not going to be, they aren't final at that point. They are still draft. There'll be a public comment period after the 21st, and we'll still be taking public comments on it. So don't feel like there's an immediate deadline to have all your ideas in. But the more ideas or more feedback you give us early, we can certainly incorporate it and then have people see them and get reactions for everybody. So again, just like Jessica said, we really appreciate you coming today, contributing to this process, and all your time and effort is really appreciated. If you have any questions about this process, please let me know. We've got the public comment portal located here. You can send me the information or you can submit it on the public comment portal. Either works great. We really appreciate all your time, and thank you and have a good evening.